Good evening. Welcome to Autor TV, the weekly TV show of the Assyrian American Association of San Jose. Today, as a guest, I have Mr. Brian Appleton. Brian, born to American parents in Japan, visited Iran many times. It was in the 1970s that he was teaching English, where he met his first Assyrian friend. Intrigued by Assyrians and the culture, and the fact that the Assyrians were able to keep their language and heritage for thousands of years without a country, and when he met his other Assyrian friend, Shamshone in San Jose, California, he started writing a book about Assyrians, which was called Shamshone, the Son of Assyria, a beautifully told story that takes us through 5 generations of Assyrian-born family from Western Azerbaijan. Mr. Appleton, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for accepting the invitation and being here. As I mentioned, you wrote the book. We are going to be talking about the book, and we're going to be talking about how you learned about Assyrian culture, about Assyrians, and how you visited Iran and met a lot of Assyrians there. But first of all, I would like you to introduce yourself to the viewers tonight, and also tell us a little about your childhood.
Well, I'm an Army brat, and as such, we moved around a lot. So I spent formative years. I spent 3 years in Greece. I grew up in Italy. I was 13 years in Italy altogether. And I came back to the United States for the first time, actually, to live here, to go to college. And I was in Washington, D.C. And then when I got out of the, when I graduated, we were in the middle of some kind of an oil embargo in '79, and the economy was down. And I talked to some of my Persian Iranian friends at university, and they said, well, if you'd like to go to Iran, we've got a friend who's director of the Air Force Language School, and we can get you a job. So that's what I did. What I forgot to mention is that when I was in boarding school in Rome, starting at age 11, I met my first Iranian friend, and he didn't speak any English, and he started teaching me Farsi, and I started teaching him English. And then in the summer of 1966, when I was 16, I went and spent the whole summer with his family. But I went by myself and spent the whole summer with his family in Iran, and they lived in Tehran, and then we went up to Shomal, to Anzali, and spent a few weeks up there, and I had the time of my life. And the first book I wrote is all about my experiences in Iran, starting when I was 16.
Yeah, that's amazing how you, met an Iranian boy when you were in Rome, actually, and that's how you came to know the Iranian cultures for the first time in your life. And as I mentioned in my introduction, you went back again to Iran. What made you go back? And that's when you also met your first Assyrian friend.
Well, as I say, I went back for work because the economy was slow here and things were booming back in those days. That was 1974. And when I was teaching, one of the faculty had a name that sounded kind of Russian, and I asked him if he was Russian, and he said, no, I'm Assyrian. And I said, Assyrian? Do you mean those folks that invented the chariot? And he said, yeah, we're still around. And I was just amazed. I mean, because, we've all studied in school when we were little, 3rd, 4th grade, about Hammurabi and Ashurbanipal and Ashurnazirpal and all of that, and the Hammurabi's laws, but it kind of stops, and I mean, it was embarrassing for me to find out that this culture had survived. It was still very much alive and around. And so I've always been fascinated by Central Asia and the Middle East, and when I was living in Iran, working there in the 70s, every time I had a vacation, instead of going to Europe where I'd grown up and going back to America, I would pick a country in the region, and I spent one summer in Afghanistan, I spent one summer in Turkey, I spent another summer in Egypt. So every time I had a vacation, I'd pick a different place. And You know, I ended up getting a BA in anthropology from George Washington University, and then I got a MA in ancient history. But my master's thesis was not on the Assyrians. It was actually about the Gandhar school of sculpture in Afghanistan, which had been influenced by Buddhism. So, but at any rate, I was fascinated by the history of the Assyrians and the Assyrian Empire, and the sort of interplay between them and the Achaemenid Empire, and how one was once controlling the other, and then vice versa. And there's this long history of the two races being interconnected, and that was very interesting to me.
And then here in San Jose, you meet your other friend, Shamshone.
Right. So what happened is that Sam was actually going to our church because his wife is British, and it's an Episcopalian church that my wife was a member of. And when they were introducing us to the parishioners, I came across this name, Sar Mechanic. Well, I started speaking Farsi to him, and it turned out that he was Assyrian, but his family name had been changed to Sar Mechanic, which is a long story, which is in my book about how that actually happened. But we became very good friends, and the other thing that's funny is that every single automobile mechanic that I have had in San Jose has been Assyrian. And so this whole thing, starting with the chariots and being good at mechanical engineering, is in your genes, I swear. So anyway, but you know, every opportunity, like I went on business to Berlin a few years back, and I went to the Pergamon Museum, and they have the Ishtar gates. It's just amazing what's in that museum, and I mean, that's just unforgettable when you see the polychrome of all that glazed brick.
Absolutely.
Just amazing.
Absolutely.
So what happened is Sam eventually retired, and I wanted to write a book about the Assyrians, not so much as a historical detailed blow-by-blow account, but to cover a very interesting period of modern Assyrian history. The independence of Azerbaijan, which involved Assyrians, of Western Azerbaijan, which was like only lasted 13 months, and the whole history of that. And the other thing is that, you know, a lot has been written about the genocide, and we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the genocide right now. And I wanted to do something a little bit different because I wanted to focus on how all these different ethnic groups for the majority of history had actually gotten along quite well. And that was kind of like, it's kind of like you look at Germany, they have a fantastic history except for that one Nazi era, you know. So, I mean, you can't throw away the whole history of a country because they have that bad era. I mean, in the United States, we slaughtered the Indians and took their land. So, I mean, every country seems to go through these bad periods. So my focus was more on how these different ethnic groups work together and serve different parts of the economy, which I found really interesting. In the first I think 2 or 3 chapters of my book, I talk about the pre-industrial age and agriculture, and how villagers actually made a living, and how they preserved food, and how they survived, and things like that, which most children today have no idea.
Exactly.
I mean, most kids have never seen a chicken lay an egg. They've never milked a cow. I was lucky because I had some uncles that had farms, you know, so I learned some of those things. But we're so far removed from our basic roots, it's something I kind of miss about Europe too, is that the past is all around you and it's still part of your living, conscious, day-to-day existence. Whereas in the New World, it's always whatever's newest is best, and to hell with the past.
Exactly.
You know?
Why did Sam agree to tell you his life story and put this in a book?
Right. Well, I started to tell you that. So what happened is that he retired, and I wanted to write a book about a personal family history about the Assyrians, and so I talked him into it. And so what I did is every Friday evening for about 1.5 years, I went to his house and just said, okay, you talk, and I would type. And that's how it came about.
What was that really fascinated you about our culture?
Well, the fact that you could keep your identity as a minority in a Muslim country, and you know, I also knew Armenians. When the part of Tehran I lived in was mostly Armenian, and I mean, both your cultures had a different alphabet, a different language, and you know, I studied linguistics, and I speak 5 languages, and I just find it fascinating. And what I unfortunately I don't speak Assyrian, but what I've noticed is that when I speak a different language, I actually take on a different persona, and I hear myself, and I'm saying things I wouldn't say in English. I'm telling jokes I wouldn't say in English. I mean, it's more than just a language. It comes with a whole lot of other things, and I was intrigued by the fact that you haven't had a nation. There was that one attempt. Well, of course, you know, there was that one attempt for Western Azerbaijan to be independent, but it still wasn't predominantly Syrian. It was more the ethnic Turkish minority. And so it seems like when the Soviet Union fell apart, that the Armenians got their country. You know, somehow Israel came into being after World War II. Some of these people got lucky, but the Assyrians never managed to pull it off, because I think your population is spread out over too many different countries.
That's true. Well, we've been a small, you know, community, small population, and we are spread out all over the world. However, I believe that it's not too late. We may have a country or a region to live in current Iraq someday, so we believe in that. Hopefully one day you can go and visit and maybe write about our new country.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
So, Brian, a part of this book, I bought your book when it was first published years ago, and I read it, and I was born in Urmi myself, where Gulpashan, the village where Sam was born, is in, and it was very interesting to me to read and imagine and remember things from my own childhood, although different, because his childhood was back in the day.
Right.
And also what this book did was that it was taking me through a generation, through a time right before the revolution, because I was born after the revolution, that I've never experienced. But through your book, I was able to read some of these stories to kind of go through that experience, although I was never there.
Right.
So Urmi, where this book starts, Gulpashan, the village in Urmi, you've never visited, you said.
No, I haven't, unfortunately. I have something to look forward to, but that was part of the attraction for me as well, to learn. It was so educational to listen to his life story, because although I didn't know, I couldn't really connect with the early part of his life in Urmia. Once he moved to Tehran for his education, then I could relate very well, because he ended up founding a civil engineering company that eventually built most of the bridges and the overpasses all around Iran. And I was there during that period, and it turns out some of my clients that I call on in San Jose actually worked with him on projects over there. So from the point where he moved to Tehran, we started to have a parallel life experience, and he knew a lot of mutual friends that I knew.
What a small world.
Yeah, so for example, he worked for, he helped on the Queen's Heart Hospital, and Manacher Eqbal was sort of overseeing that project for the Queen. It was the Queen Mother's Hospital. Well, I became friends with the Eqbal family through, well, it's a long story, but anyway. So we had a lot of that in common, and what we were trying to capture with this book, because we were collaborating on it, was, I mean, a number of things. The Assyrian experience as a minority, also there were episodes in here where Muslims went out of their way and took great risks to help him. So there was you know, it's trying to give a kind of a balanced approach. There was also examples of him not being able to succeed. Like, he was accepted to the military academy, but the commander said, "You're never going to make it as a Christian. They're not going to accept you." And so it was interesting from that standpoint, the pros and cons of being a minority. And then just what it was like doing business during the time of the Shah and the boom years and the corruption and how to work around it, and the fact that there were some cabinet ministers who were actually completely honest. I mean, it was like fluke, right? But he was able to actually work with, I think Kalchan was one of them, the transportation minister, who gave him a lot of good business and was always very fair with him. And then, of course, the whole period of that independence movement, and then it turned out that Sam's father was friends with the president of the Republic of Mahabad, which only survived 11 months. But they had done some real estate deals together, so they were close to the Kurd minority, and there's a lot in the book about that period. And then there's a whole chapter on his father, who was named Nimrud, which makes me sad because the IS just devastated the historic ruins in Nimrud. But anyway, his father's story is a book in itself, but I wrote one chapter. He came to the United States back in the early, well, it was probably around 1912 or something, and he was only 9 years old, and he couldn't even speak English, and nobody knew who he was, and it was just an amazing story how he survived and what happened, and then eventually how he went back to Iran.
Yeah, I remember reading that. I remember reading this. So you met your first Assyrian friend back in Tehran in 1974, as you mentioned, and then you reconnected with the Assyrians through Sam again here. And right now you're also gardening with some Assyrians. I know, in San Jose. So that connection has always stayed there.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know, as I say, I don't speak Assyrian, but when I left Iran, I figured, well, I'll never have any reason to speak Farsi again. And I came to Northern California, and I was wrong. I mean, it's like almost, I'm speaking Persian almost daily, and a lot of my customers are Persian. So, but as far as the Assyrians go, I have a younger son who's handicapped, and one of the things he has a passion for is gardening. So we joined this community garden over on Lean, and you were telling me your brother gardens over
exactly.
there.
So, and I'm sure there are a lot of Assyrians who are watching us now.
So there are these 3 trees, and they have this table they've set up, and they do kebabs, and they make tea, and they're always doing tarof and trying to give me tea and food, and I'm always going, "No, I just ate, please," you know. And so we go through this.
Now, if you tell them you wrote a book about Assyrians, you'll have to eat and drink with them. No choice, Brian.
I'm sure. But anyway, they've taught me a lot about gardening. I was having trouble with cucumbers, but they're all experts.
That's awesome. Yeah, they're almost all of them are back from Urmi, from the villages, you know, near Gulpashan, where Sam is from. So they all then grew up gardening and farming.
And then the other thing is they're always playing backgammon under there.
That's true. That's true.
I actually had Sam try to teach me how to play for a few months because I was so determined, you know, that I wanted to learn, but I could never learn to play as fast as those old guys.
Well, hopefully one day you will be able to. Brian, you also were recently invited to the Assyrian American Association of San Jose. You had a book signing. We were there. You know, you told us the amazing story behind the book and how you started writing and why you wrote the book and all of that. What was your experience on that day with the Assyrians and meeting so many? And
yeah, well, I wasn't sure what to expect because it took me quite a while to get the attention of your community from the time this book was published. I think it was almost 2 years. And I don't mean this in any kind of a negative way at all. I think that a lot of ethnic minorities in the United States survive by being very closed and sticking together and helping each other. And, you know, like Vietnamese families come over and they go and they buy a house all together and they pay cash and they never go to the bank.
Yeah.
And they don't borrow, and they all live supposedly happily together. I don't believe it, but anyway.
They do.
The other thing that's funny is that, you know, like I said, I grew up in Greece and Italy and Iran, and you know, in Iran, if a man cries, that's considered normal. It's not looked down on, you know, but in this sort of WASP culture that we have in the United States, that's sort of dominant, what we think of as the American dominant culture, you know, we think of Gary Cooper or somebody that's this silent but deadly, and he's always in control and he can never show emotions, and they would just look at an Iranian crying over something and they wouldn't get it, you know. It was like this, I don't know if you saw the movie. One of my friends is Sharnush Parsipur, who's an author, and she wrote a book called, what was it called? It was about Women Without Men, which was a spoof on Hemingway's book Men Without Women. And Shirin, what's her name? Shirin Nishat made a movie of it. And there's this scene where the Sava comes and breaks up this house looking for a communist, and, you know, interrogates everybody, and they were in the middle of having a party, right? And the next thing you know, this chief of police, secret police, is reciting poetry, and he's like just chilled because everybody's like reading poetry and reciting poetry. And I mean, it was like, this could not happen in the United States. I mean, you wouldn't be able to get a police raid to stop because you started reading poetry. So, I mean, you know, it's the sort of thing where there was a proverb that I used to hear when I lived in Iran, which was that things that are possible everywhere else in the world are impossible in Iran, and things that are impossible everywhere else in the world are possible in Iran. And there was always a way. You could always find a way. You know, your wife is 7 months pregnant, and technically she's not supposed to fly on a plane, but you'd find a way to get her out, you know? So that's kind of what I liked, is that there was this human angle that even when I went back in 2008, I had that same experience. I forgot that you're not supposed to take pictures of public buildings, and I took a picture of the Supreme Court, and the guard seized my camera, and I was just flabbergasted because it was my son's camera, and I'd taken over 400 pictures, and I'm going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I said, calm down, this is Iran. This was 2008. And so I went back to I let him cool off. 10 minutes later, I went back and I said, you remember me? And he said, yeah. I said, you know, you took my camera? And he said, yeah. I said, where did you take it? So he said, I took it to the security office. And I said, do you mind if I go talk to them? And he says, no, go ahead. Now here's the funny part. He took my camera for taking a picture of the building, but he let me walk by myself, unescorted, through the Supreme Court while it was in session. And I found the security office.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's one guy, and he's looking at my camera, and I explained to him that I'd just taken the one picture of a public building. He was welcome to look at the rest of them, and if he wanted, I could erase it in front of him, and in less than 3 minutes, I had my camera back.
That's awesome. So, perfect, right?
That would never happen here.
So when is your next trip, Brian? To Urmi?
Well, everybody keeps asking me to go, and I was supposed to go for that film I was making that I was telling you about on the Shah, but somehow that got postponed. So I've got a couple of other people asking me to go with them, but what I'd like to do is to drag Sam back over there, because he's never been back since the revolution.
Oh, wow.
And that would be so much fun, you know.
That would be definitely a great experience for both of you. He could take you back to Gulpashan, and where he was born and raised, and
show me the river he swam in as a kid.
That would be an amazing experience.
Yeah. And a lot of interesting things come out whenever I write a book. This is my 4th book. You meet such interesting people, and I don't know if you noticed, but Richard Fry, who passed away recently, who's a great Iran expert, was married to the Assyrian lady Dr. Eden Nabi.
Yes, I know Dr. Eden Nabi.
When I told her I was writing this book, it turns out that her family house was right across the street from Sam's house in Gulfachin. And so, you know, she said, that's a great project. You know, so she endorsed my book.
Yeah, yeah, I read that actually. Yeah, that is amazing. So you just mentioned that you wrote 4 books. Tell us a little more about it. You said the
well, the first book was called Tales from the Syrian. And that was a series of short stories about my own experiences in Iran, starting from when I was 16, and then lastly in 2008. You know, what I wanted to do by going back, obviously it was very emotional for me to go back after 32 years, but one of the things that happened to me during the revolution is I was taken hostage, and I was actually saved by a very brave Muslim Iranian woman who was just a friend, who knew where they were holding me, and she hired 2 gunmen, and they came and they liberated me.
Wow.
And they said, either you let him go or we're going to shoot it out. And that's all in my first book about that whole experience and what a brave woman she was.
Oh, certainly worth reading.
Yeah, and then just to top that off, when I went back in 2008, 32 years later, you know, when I left, she had a 2-year-old daughter, and I used to take the daughter around in a baby carriage and give her breakfast and stuff. We were very close friends. My friend who'd saved me had passed away, but her daughter was the first person to call me when I got to Tehran Hilton.
Oh, that's incredible.
Which is now Tehran Esteghlal. It's the Esteghlal Hotel. But she called me at 2 in the morning because you know how they always get the worst flights to get into Iran. So I said, how did you know I was here? And she says, get a cab and come and see us right now. And I said, but it's 2 a.m. She says, I don't care. And I said, you sound just like your mother. So I went there, and she had a 2-year-old boy. So he was the same age that she was the last time. It was very emotional. And that's in my first book, too, the last chapter. And one of the other things I was trying to do, first of all, I was trying to get closure on being taken hostage, so I purposely stayed in the same hotel where I was taken hostage. And then secondly, of course, I was trying to find a lot of old friends, which I did, the ones that were still alive, because 32 years is a long time.
Yes, exactly.
And then the other thing is that I didn't want anybody to accuse me of being out of touch with reality and just remembering Iran like it was, you know, because I've tried very hard to stay current with what's happening now.
Awesome, Brian. Well, I hope when you go back, you'll have an amazing experience. Maybe you'll write another book.
Oh,
you never know. Hearing you talking about your experience and all of that like this, I wouldn't be surprised if you publish another book in a couple of years. You know, I know you wrote a book about poetry. When was it published? You didn't talk about that.
That was published last year, 2014, and it's called 1,000 Years at the Bottom of a Well, semicolon, Reflections of a Soul. And so I was in this period where every day I would write 2 or 3 poems for 2 years. And some of them were in Persian, some of them were in French, and some of them were in Italian, but about 95% were in English. But I just couldn't stop, and so I would put them on Facebook, and my name on Facebook is actually Omid Irani, and there's a story behind that, because when Facebook first started, it was like it was being administered by a bunch of teenage girls that were in some kind of a clique, and if you added people that they didn't think you really knew, they would disable your account. You know, now they've laxed up a little bit, so I have 5,000 friends on Facebook, which is the limit. And I would say 90% of them are Iranian, and most of them are in Iran.
Oh,
so
interesting.
I try to communicate with them that way. But at any rate, what I would do is I would post my poetry every day and see how many people liked it. And that way I could judge for free whether people thought it was any good or not. So, but I've been writing poetry ever since I was in high school or middle school. But what happened is a reader in Boston said, you should publish it. And I said, well, I can't afford to spend any more money on publishing. It's expensive. Even this book, the publisher invested $32,000 in the book. So it wasn't my money. But if I want to advertise it, if I want to have, even bookstores charge you, the author, some of them, to talk. They charge you. I mean, I was amazed to find that out. So advertising, everything you try to do costs money. So I said, I just can't afford to do it. And so she says, well, go to Amazon. They have a thing called Create Space, and you can publish your own book in it. And so they have a tutorial and how to set the margins, how to do everything. And then if you get stuck, you can actually talk to a live person. I mean, I'm not here to endorse Amazon. But,
no, but it's good to know.
It's good for people to know if you have any aspirations of publishing and you can't get a legitimate publisher, because it's very difficult. And I shouldn't say legitimate. It's traditional publisher versus desktop versus self-publishing. But at any rate, the whole industry is changing. And the reason that Amazon and a lot of these other major actual traditional book publishers have gotten into digital books and all that stuff is that they can't fight it anymore. Yeah. So they have to join it. But at any rate, she talked me into it. So I got the book of 285 pages of my poetry published, and it didn't cost me a penny. And they publish on demand, and you don't even know it. If you place an order, you'll have it in a week.
Okay, awesome. So. Well, good to look up. Brian, you know, at the end of this discussion interview, how can people contact you if they want to buy your books, if they want to talk to you, send you an email, call you?
I have a website that's called www.zirzamin.com, and I spell mean with 2 E's so that the Americans will know how to pronounce it. So Zirzamin. And also there's some music company that spells it I-N, so I had to have a different spelling. It's just like my friend Rashid, the singer, spells his name Rushid with a U because there was already a Rashid. So anyway, you have to be careful of these kinds of copyright issues. And so you can go on there, and I have a blog, and you're welcome to make comments. And I have a calendar of events about Iranian culture, cultural events in the United States, and Assyrian cultural events. There's also photo albums of different subjects, Iranian contemporary writers. You know, somebody mentioned that all the famous Iranian writers were medieval, and I said that's not true. And so I set up this photo album, and I identified 232 Iranian contemporary writers, and I have photos of them all. So,
that's awesome.
Anyway. Or like when I think it was the last Olympics when Iran won so many medals. I have pictures of all those guys and where they placed and all that. So there's a lot of good information on there. Good,
awesome. And then you also have a dedicated phone number, you said?
Yes,
for people to call you?
Just for that website, and that's 408-363-1721. You can also purchase my book through the website, the bookstore of the publisher, which in this case is Tate Publishing. And the first book, The Tales from the Zirzamin, is also Tate Publishing in its 2nd edition. You can buy them off my website, Amazon, Google Books. There's a few bookstores like Books Inc. in the Bay Area where you can find them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Brian. Thanks again for coming to our show today and introducing your book and talking about your passion and love for the Iranian culture and specifically the Assyrian culture. And we are looking forward to hearing more from you in the future. Thank you.
Great. I just wanted to say one more thing.
Please go ahead.
And that is that one of the people that endorsed my book is named Hannibal Travis, and he's one of the authorities on the Assyrian genocide. And what he was saying is that it's sort of been melded with the Armenian genocide and in a way overlooked, but he had a figure of about 300,000 Assyrians between 1914 and 1923. And I just wanted to say that I have been appalled by what's happening in Mosul and in Syria and Iraq to the Assyrian population, and my heart goes out to you. And there are certain images that I've seen online of that I just can't get out of my head, and I just can't believe it's happening again.
Yeah, neither can we, Brian, but we truly appreciate it. Thank you very much for feeling with us in this, and we're hoping to get as much awareness as we possibly can. That's all we could do in the Western world. So Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thanks,
me.
Brian.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight again. We will be back with you with a new show next week. Have a great evening.